This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, and roving guests. And today I'm joined by our very regular head gardener, Josie Lewis. I mean, very regular in terms of I'm always here on the podcast very regularly. And do you know what we thought we'd talk about today is hellebores, which I know in a sense you're all thinking, everybody talks about hellebores as winter proceeds towards spring. But the thing is that we have just been so blown away by trials that we've had here of new varieties, as well as tried and tested ones that we've had in the garden now for 3 decades in some cases, that we thought we'd talk about them again. And the main sort of jogger for that was we had snow here, really quite a lot of snow last week. And, you know, all the pots, the containers were completely covered in snow. And it was just so noticeable, the things that have not survived, or if they have survived, which they may well have done, they're going to break from the base and come back like the heucheras, which have really taken a bit of a bashing from the snow. Hellebores, it's as if nothing has happened. Now the snow is gone. We've had, we went to -7 here, which is quite unusual for us in early part of last week. And that is just what's remarkable about them. And I guess it sort of isn't when one knows where they come from. But anyway, Josie, why don't you mention maybe 1 or 2 of your favourites, and we'll bat it between us and spread in all the sort of conditioning, picking tips as we go, growing tips as we go for this time of year.
I've just walked through the Dutch yard and there's a pot there just by the wellhead and it just looks stunning. And then there's another one by our back door and they're just covered in flowers. Unbelievable. As you say, a few other things are looking slightly the worse for wear. But I think the other thing I was impressed with, going off hellebores for a minute, is the salad toppers. The serrata that's here. It's just looks untouched, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally. The rocket and yeah, exactly. And the red oak leaf variety that we've got on trial, that's been amazing too. Yeah, I totally agree.
Even that, yeah. So my favourite of the ones we've got here at the moment is Guess. It's a creamy green pink. It's got smaller flowers, isn't it? It gets about 60 centimetres, something like that. But it's just so covered in flowers. It's absolutely stunning. So I really love that one.
Yeah, that's been so. Guess, just so everybody understands, is like the question mark, that sort of guess. So Guess.
Yeah.
And it's ideal for a pot, which is where Josie's planted it. And it's just been really fantastic. And it's been in flower already for a month, I would say.
Yes, long before Christmas. Yeah, even though they say the flowering time is January onwards, a lot of these have been, I suppose, milder autumn, ideal conditions for them to get going, really.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that I think is new since I sort of knew hellebores as a child, which a lot of them were bred from the Lenten varieties. The hybrids were bred from them, which the reason they're called Lenten hellebore is because that's Easter. And so really they flowered from March and April. Whereas a lot of these new hybrids, Guess being one of them, and we'll come on to more, they seem to have been bred with different genetics, and they really do start flowering just as the garden goes over in November, and out they come. I mean, we've had one called Maestro and its brother Merlin, and Maestro I've got by my back door, not in a pot but in the ground, and that starts flowering in November and goes on until February, and then Merlin comes in February and goes on until June. So between those two brothers, you have just such a good succession. But that's the thing. There just seem to be so many more now that really do flower. And we're going to talk about them that flower from the end of autumn.
Yes, yeah. You just mentioned Lenten rose. Their naming is quite confusing. So they're known as Lenten rose. They're also known as snow roses, Christmas roses. I mean, obviously, they're no relation to a rose, but people new to gardening, I think, is it a rose? What is it?
Oh, yeah, good point.
They're in the buttercup family, so they're more closely related to a buttercup than a rose. So that's why we use Latin names, so no one gets confused.
Exactly. Well, just on the new hybrids, I'm going to add one in. So when I was at the nursery in November, and it's true they had been under glass, but I walked around with Tom and we actually did a post on Instagram about this, and we planted up a container with the variety called Strawberry Moon. And I guess the reason it's called Strawberry Moon is they're huge flowers. I mean, the flowers fill the palm of my hand, not including the fingers, but the palm of my hand. And they're a sort of standard kind of hellebore, pinky, slightly crimsony white in the centre. But they have literally flowered from the moment I bought those containers back, which was probably the middle of November. They're absolutely pumping it now. And so what a great winter container plant, whatever size your garden, because just as everything else, all your nemesias and your fuchsias and whatever else you've got in your pots, even if you've got a flower yard, properly go over, that's when these come out into flower. And that's why I just am increasingly crazy about them and wanted us to do a separate episode on them. So Strawberry Moon is another massive flowers. I mean, they are really, really huge. And just so many of them, just new ones coming all the time. So even after the snow, I went out and looked at them this morning, and again, lots and lots of buds coming, and actually new shoots breaking from the base with lots of buds on those. So that's another really superb one, I'd say.
Yes, yeah. And sticking with the reds, one that I really like is, as its name suggests, is very small Bijou, which is perfect for pots. I'm always obsessing about things to put in pots. Gets to about 30 centimetres. So some of the others can get to 50 or 60 centimetres. But this one stays nice and small. So if you've got smaller pots, it's ideal. We've got some bigger whopper pots where we can put the bigger ones in. And like you planted Strawberry Moon in that ribby tub planter, it's slightly bigger. But if you've got, smaller, what we call pelargonium pots, then this Bijou is perfect for that.
And I think it's worth saying, I'm mentioning that, yes, they are expensive initially, these hybrids. They're quite expensive. I can't remember exactly what. But, of course, these are totally perennial. And so you could always lift them out of your pot if you've only got a few pots, put them in plastic pots and sort of shove them somewhere shady. Because, of course, all of these are very, very tolerant of shade, if not prefer it. We'll come on to a couple that like it in the sun. And then you could plant up your pots with your so-called summer bedding just when these go over in April and May. And then you can do the swap over again. And they're totally perennial. So then you can plant these up again and you've got them all the way through the winter months. So that's how I want us to increasingly trial them and use them in the garden here. And I'm sure you agree, Josie.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. They're so versatile, aren't they? Another variety that I really like, well, it's a series really, the Pretty Ellens. So they come in
so
various colours, Pretty Ellen pink, Pretty Ellen white, and so on. Again, a shorter variety, but, so floriferous and, fabulous. Absolutely wonderful.
And they cut very well, those ones, don't they? We've got double Ellen here as well.
Yeah.
And she cuts well. Should we chat about cutting a bit now?
Yes, yeah.
So I'm sure you all know that hellebores are famously temperamental in the vase. And so the traditional way of arranging them is to cut single heads and float them in bowls. But we're more ambitious of our hellebores than that. And what we've found is that there are really 5 things that you need to bear in mind to get hellebores to last well in the vase. And maybe, again, Josie and I can just sort of bat this between us. But the first thing I would say is what you pick. And it is down to variety a little bit, but all the ones we've mentioned, we've trialled and pick well. But the thing is also, it's the stage of the flower or the flower stem that you're picking. And it's really worth looking out for the ones that are already running to seed. So they've dropped their yellow anthers, and you can see this beautiful tricorn or five-corn sort of hat forming at the centre of the flower. And as long as one of the flowers is at that stage, it literally means that they've been growing and, emerged from the ground about 8 weeks before. And so they've already got to the stage where they're forming the beginnings of a seed head. And that means they've got more lignin in their cell walls, so they're more likely to remain upstanding and are less floppy. And that is the number one key thing, is what the stems you're actually choosing to harvest.
Yeah, just to explain for those of you who like a bit of plant biology, botany. So what we think of as the petals, if they're speckled, red, white, whatever, are in fact sepals. The petals are spread to form the nectaries. So they're right in the centre. But the sepals last. That's why hellebores last for so long, what we call the flower heads. It's because they don't fall like petals would. And as you say, as they're fertilised and the seed starts to form, then the sepals start to change colour. So, if you've got a creamy white flower head, then it starts to go through the pink, the greens and the pink stages, which, it just goes on for weeks and weeks, and every stage is beautiful. Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why they last so long. But did you want to talk through how we cut them? And
yeah, so, you often do the picking for me. So what would be your first thing once you'd pick them? They would go straight into water, but then you'd come in, and what would you do next?
So we would sear the ends for 10 seconds, maybe. Well, it depends what stage they're at, really. And then slit them. So not cut through them, but just with the sharp knife of some sort, just make slits down the length of them. So you're just scoring the surface, really.
The whole length
the whole
of stem.
Yes, yeah. And then if we have time, in an ideal world, we lay them, don't tell Sophie in the kitchen, but we borrow her big baking trays, and we lay them down in that overnight. So they absorb as much water at the whole surface as possible. And then we'll arrange them the following day. You'll always get some that won't respond to anything. So don't be disheartened if they flop. There are some that are much better than others. And as you're saying, the stage they're at in their life cycle has a huge influence on how they hold up.
But what I find, because often if I'm teaching away from here in January and February and March, we'll pick loads and loads and loads of hellebores for me to take to decorate the venue, but also for us to demonstrate with. And what I find is, so Josie will have picked them at the right stage. They will have had their stem ends seared. They will then be scored. They will then be floated. So that's sort of 4 points. But the fifth point is that, not surprisingly, hellebores are exceptionally temperature sensitive. So they're used to living outside, even in the snow, as we discussed at the beginning. So they're extremely cold tolerant. What they're not tolerant of is heat. And so what we find is, if we're in a venue that is quite hot, which of course quite a lot of our houses and places that we want to be in the winter have got central heating pumping away in some description. And what we find is, if they do flop, what we do at the end of a teaching day is we'll literally put them back soaking for 5 or 6 hours, ideally flat again. So again, the slits down the stem can absorb water. And then ideally we put them out in the cold in a bucket overnight. And what I find is the combination of that floating again, if you've got any temperamental ones, and then the whole lot going out in the cold on the doorstep. And as long as you haven't got thick snow forecast, you can even go to -1, -2, and they won't bat an eyelid. But having them outside, not inside near a radiator, makes a massive difference. And then genuinely, I promise you, we can sometimes get them to last 2 weeks at least. And so even when I get back from an away day, I can bring them home and have them on my kitchen table. But again, as long as I put that vase out when I let the dogs out for a wee at night and bring them back in the morning, it makes the most enormous difference. And just while we're on this, I'm just going to take a little sidestep to tell you that I've really noticed that with paper whites this year. We've got lots of lovely paper whites growing here that we planted in November, and we had some over Christmas, a big table centre for our Christmas table, and they were really honestly beginning to go over, and I was half thinking, oh, maybe I'll just take them out of their container, keep the bulbs, put them down by the polytunnel. But I didn't. I thought, no, there are a few buds coming. So I shoved them into our cold greenhouse, and they have kept going for another 3 or even now nearly 4 weeks. And that is just amazing to me. So paper whites, again, not surprisingly, they originate, I think, from places like Morocco, their genetics, and Israel and Palestine. And they flower from November until January, February. But they like cold nights particularly. And so all these things, it's just worth sort of placing them, how they grow in the wild and where they grow in the wild, and then trying to recreate that as near as possible in the conditions that you give them if you want to maximise on vase life. So that's a sort of general principle that the more I garden, the more I learn that applies, really.
Yes, and as you say, because hellebores come from the same sort of area, they're Mediterranean Sea and Middle East, aren't they? So it makes sense, doesn't it? And it's always good to go back and see where a plant originates to see what conditions they'd like.
Yeah. Perhaps you could talk a bit about the black spot thing, Josie, and any sort of P&D stuff, because you're much better on that than me.
So pests and diseases, as we've said, they're such, hardy, tough plants. But there are a few things that do affect them. They do get aphids, so, encourage your bird army into the garden to deal with those. You can go around squishing the aphids, but that's a thankless task, really. You might see some of the buds are nibbled as well, and that's usually mice, usually when it's cold. Probably if we go out and have a look now after the snow, we might see some of that happening. The other thing you might see is leaf miner, little tunnels through the leaves. So that is from the leaf miner, which are little larvae tunnelling their way through. It's not really harmful, and it won't affect the plant. It affects the look of the plant, but it won't kill it off. The other thing people will be really familiar with is black spot, which you'll see on a lot of the leaves, which is why we tend to cut the leaves off, early in the year. That's a good job after Christmas, but any time you want to do it really before all the buds come through, so you can just take a handful and cut the whole lot off. But once the stems with the flower heads start to emerge, then you can't do that. You have to do it stem by stem, cutting the leaves off. I tend not to cut the whole lot down. It looks slightly unnatural to me to have the whole thing shorn to the ground. So if there's any good, healthy looking leaves, I'll leave them. But any signs of black spot, I'll clear those away. And any debris around the base of the plant that's infected in any way, obviously clear all that away as well.
And just to butt in there, just to be clear, so this is a fungal disease, and the reason that you're doing the clearing of the foliage, if it's showing any sign of infection, is because it will then cross-transfer onto the flowers.
Yes.
And so what you'll find is, particularly, you'll really notice it on your beautiful whites, like Hellebores niger, which is pure white, which is the Christmas rose. You'll see sort of almost like blight marks like you would see on your tomatoes or your potatoes. And it is because it's obviously the same family, same fungus. And that's what you're needing to avoid. So you need to just sort of be fastidious for a minute and just clean them so you don't get that cross-infection. Because unfortunately, once it's then transferred into the following spring, those flowers will likely be marked all the way through their life cycle. And so you won't be able to pick them because they don't look nice. So it's the leaves that harbour it and then transfer it to the flowers. So that's just to embellish that a bit, to give more detail of what Josie's talking about.
Yes, yeah. And, if you're suffering from a lot of black spot, then you need to look at the soil and what the hellebore planted in. They like damper, cooler soil, but they don't like to be waterlogged. And any waterlogging will encourage proliferation of the fungal diseases. So, make sure once you've cleared the black spot, then add a mulch of leaf mould. Makes it look nice, but that's what they want. They like to live under deciduous shrubs, but you can't have them too close because that'll dry out too much in summer. It's sort of finding a piece of your garden which has got a compromise of most things. But, if you mulch them well, a leaf mould is ideal, but any homemade compost would be great. Then you're improving the soil each year, and that's what they really like.
And what about in pots, Josie? What would you use? What sort of medium would you use in pots?
So they like a nutritious compost, and they don't like to be over potted. So if you're just potting one in a pot, don't put it in a huge pot. But if it's sharing a bigger pot, then other plants will be taking up the moisture as well. They just do not like waterlogging. So a nutritious compost, I'd use John in his number 2, something like that. And if you're leaving them in permanently, I would repot them every couple of years, so they've got fresh compost to grow away in.
Yeah.
If the pot's too big, to repot, then scrape the top away and just top dress the pot. But yeah, feed them. They do like a bit of food. Okay,
and in a pot, would you? I mean, you're doing that with the planting medium, or are you actually giving a top dress as well?
You're doing it really with the planting medium because they all have fertilizer mixed into the compost. So that should really be enough. But, in the second year, you could mulch them with like 6X, something like that, and an organic fertilizer that's a bit richer.
Great. And Josie's mentioned that they love this shady spot, and that's what's so useful about them in a way. But if you have a really sunbaked garden and you still want to grow one hellebore and you just don't have any shady spots, which is quite rare, but the Corsican hellebore, which you can tell by its name, Hellebores argutifolius, but originally from Corsica, is really rather amazing and loves a good baking. So it's sort of unusual in that. It's like I always find with acanthus, most acanthus love a good baking, but we grow one here called rue leddon, which likes the shade. And it's rather nice when you've got this family that has this sort of reputation of only liking one situation. And in fact, you can find ones, if you love them, that like another situation. I adore the Corsican hellebore. I was brought up on it. When I was a child, it was called Hellebores corsicus, but it was renamed quite a long time ago, argutifolius. And it's fantastic for cutting. And actually for our Christmas decorating the house, I had a big vase, a huge urn that I picked artichoke leaves and Hellebores corsicus, argutifolius, which funnily enough were on our compost there's a big heap down by the polytunnel, and I spotted 2 or 3 self-seeded plants down there, and I thought, oh, well, Josie won't mind if I take those. They're not in the garden. No one's going to notice. So I picked every single flower stem from them, brought them in, seared them with the artichoke leaves, which again is almost evergreen in the garden here. And just the combination of those two with an odd bit of the willow, Salix Nancy Saunders, it just looked fabulous in this big urn. And I only just chucked it away. So it's done 3 weeks in the barn on a side table, looking rather splendid. But it's a cracking one. If you were to name a real favourite, Josie, or perhaps a couple, we could round off with a couple of favourites each.
Okay. I was just going to add to the argutifolius, it's such a good for pollinators because the early emerging pollinators, because they flower so early, they're perfect because the flowers are really rich in nectar and pollen protein. So it's good for feeding those. But for my favourite, I would pick the British native Hellebores foetidus, which is my garden at home is just full of it, and I absolutely love it. It's finely cut leaves. Some leaves can be a bit coarse, but on this one, they're so finely cut, beautiful. The green bells is, it's just unbeatable for me.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love it too. There's one called Wesker Flisk, or is it Fisk? Which has got, it's got crimson colouring at the centre of the leaf, and it has a more prominent crimson band around the bottom of each bell. And that self-seeds in the farmhouse garden here. I remember planting it maybe 15 years ago, and I love it too. Yes. If I was to pick a favourite, I think it would probably be Maestro or Merlin.
Okay.
Just for old time's sake, I guess. I mean, in that we did a trial of them probably 5 or 6 years ago now, and just really reliable perennials. Don't seem to get the black spot problem as much as some of the others. And they're just so joyful for me, as I'm an obsessive picker. Do you know, funnily enough, almost as much in the winter as I am in the spring and summer. There's such abundance here. I love picking just single stems of things that I might have by my bed or on my desk or by the bath, just literally one head. And Merlin gives me that from sort of January to March, but it's Maestro that gives me that from my just outside my north-facing back door from November until January or February. So I reckon one or other of those would have to be my number one top choice. Anyway, they're just an obvious family to talk about at this time of year, but really just the most splendid plants.
Yeah, very rewarding, very promiscuous. So they'll breed together and you'll get all sorts of colours. So yeah, all round wonderful plants.
Yeah, tip top. Thank you, Josie. Thanks so much for listening to Josie Lewis and I on Hellebores and new varieties as well as old. And next week, I'm starting a series on my own, and I'm going to do 6 episodes on a thing that is obviously a massive theme in my gardening kind of life, which is about colour. And I'm going to start with a sort of general introduction of the rules of colour that I believe in, and then how the next episode will be on how you can apply that to your own garden. And then there'll be 4 more episodes after that, each one concentrating on a different palette and the plants that I believe can give you the best succession from February or March right the way through until October, November, if you like a particular colour family. So if you like a particular palette. So there will be the sort of dark rich, there will be the brilliant boiled sweets, there will be the sort of cashmere jersey, soft and warm, and then there will be the soft and cool. So 6 episodes, and we kick off with them next week. So I hope to see you then. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.